January 2023 has been a very bright start for Marvel Snap with the release of Savage Lands, a fantastic season pass which brought with it Zabu, a card many people have been looking forward to and enjoying brewing with so far. But many players were surprised to see there was no balance patch, no changes to existing cards coming alongside the Savage Lands to help freshen up that metagame. And what? Okay, alright, nobody panic. Ben Brode, over on Twitter, had announced that the new patch was going to be coming tomorrow. It's going to land January 4th, just 2 days after the Savage Lands, with balance changes and other cool stuff. It's not the patch that includes the battle mode, but it's going to include other cool stuff. And of course, that's very exciting. We couldn't wait. It's going to line up with a live stream and... It would appear the team at Second Dinner have discovered a last-minute issue with the patch they were planning to release on January 4th. It's going to be delayed, and we'd have more details soon, and it shouldn't be longer than a week of delay while they deal with the issue. Now, I thought this was going to be the last I heard of the patch before everything went live, and people, of course, asked me, Howling Minds, what do you think is going to be hit? How do we nerf Leader? What does Aero look like now? And I've reserved judgment on giving anything out because it's all speculation at the end of the day. And then, of course, somebody forgot to tell the official Korean community that the patch had been delayed, and as a result, they decided to publish the patch notes. Now, I wasn't going to talk about this until these patch notes were confirmed to be real and had gone live inside of the game, just in case things changed or perhaps they were fake in some way. Unfortunately for us, Ben Brode has confirmed, well, all but confirmed, I should say, these patch notes are real over on Twitter by giving additional context to the Leader nerf, which we will go into very, very shortly. However, these patch notes were attached to a Korean forum from the team in the Korean community, and we now have an English translated copy of them available on the website, which you can find in the description box below, as well as the original Korean copy as well. We're going to go through the noticeable inclusions of this one, and then I'm going to break down all of these buffs and nerfs for you, and kind of give you my feelings and opinions on where they stand going into the future of Marvel Snap. If you enjoy this style of content, please do me a small favour and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments section down below that this is the kind of video you'd like to see more of in the future, or tell me that you don't, because that also helps inform our content and helps keep the algorithm happy too. Make sure to press the like button while you're down there. Okay, starting from the very top, the leak does in fact confirm artist credits for variants will now be available, and I personally think this is fantastic. Artists deserve credits for their work. They do incredible work on games like Marvel Snap, and knowing where your art came from, so maybe you can go out of your way and buy a print of it from that artist and support their work, is a fantastic inclusion that I personally think is well past due. So credit to Second Dinner for getting this one in on this balance patch. Orca has finally been added into Series 4. Not an awful lot to say here. Looking forward to seeing how Orca performs over the course of a game on a game of Marvel Snap, but I think most people didn't even notice that it was missing from Series 4 and didn't release as expected, so kind of a bit lackluster for most folks. Hoping this one kind of pulls out a magical performance to put those fears to rest. We have a bundle on the way. A Pro Bundle is what it's being called. We're told it includes 12,500 credits and enough boosters to upgrade 8 cards from Common to Infinity. There'll be a little more kind of detail about this in a bit. The notes kind of mention that it is for new players who want to get started right away, is being released for them as a one-time purchase. It doesn't, however, mention a price, and it doesn't confirm if it will be available to all players that aren't new players. We'll just kind of have to wait and see until the balance patch drops as to whether that is the case. If you have a completed Series 3 of cards, the way you get collector's tokens is changing slightly. The payout is not going to be static anymore. There isn't going to be a fixed 400 collector's token amount that you can get from opening caches. Instead, every time you would have previously opened 400, you will now open a number between 200 and 600 instead in order to add some variety. This does not, however, change the drop rate, and you should be expecting to have roughly the same amount of collector's tokens at any one time as you did before. Moving on to the cards that were nerfed, I can confirm that Aero, Galactus, Leader, and Nova are cards that have been adjusted with this balance patch, and we'll go into their changes in more detail in just a moment. If you're looking for the cards that have been buffed, The Guardians of the Galaxy in the form of Drax and Groot have received small buffs. Hazmat has been buffed, kind of, in a way. Black Cat and Nakia have also received buffs this time around. So, let's try and break down each of these changes, what happened to each card for you, and just let you know what I think all around. And then we'll talk about, I guess, briefly, some of the other things that have been added at the very end. First up, we take a look at Aero. Aero, of course, was a 5-cost, 8-power card that is now being adjusted to have 7 power instead. The developer comments on this are, Aero's effectiveness is great at both obstruction and control, and previously they had increased Aero's stats to where they are now, but since players have realised how to use it correctly, we thought it might be a good idea to lower the power a little bit. I think this change is mostly fine. I wouldn't have minded seeing Aero go to 6 power instead. I think 7 is still quite a large stat line on a 5-cost card that has an ability that is arguably a bit above rate for a 5-cost card, which is why it sees so much play over some of the alternative options. But I do think this is the correct change on Aero. I think adjusting the numbers for Aero is going to be fine. The effect is very powerful, but it's very fun and very interactive, which I think are very important parts of what Marvel Snap is about. So I think if I was going to adjust Aero, it was definitely going to be in stats. And I like the approach of taking the tentative route down, moving it to 7 first, and if the card continues to be a bit too dominant or a bit too oppressive, we can look at moving it further down later on. But all in all, I like this change. I think it is a pretty solid one. Galactus is next, of course. We knew this one was at risk of being adjusted because it was previously on the watch list, which you can find a video about tucked above if you like. The developers' comments on this one are really simple, but the change is also very simple. Again, we're just losing a point of power, going from a 6-3 down to a 6-2. Even at the highest rank play, decks using Galactus have huge cube gains and win rates. Some decks don't explicitly announce that they are Galactus decks or that he will be coming, and there are plenty of support cards that some decks are finding it difficult to counter. We're going to start by lowering Galactus' power by 1, and then evaluate if further changes are needed. This one I'm not so sold does very much. I know some members of the community are actually insisting this is secretly a buff, which is kind of crazy to me. This is not a card I think it's about the power a lot of the time. I think a lot of the games here end off the back of Leader or Shang-Chi or Spider-Man or Death or Null or Destroyer, the follow-up to Galactus after you make the game into a one-lane game, and less so about Galactus itself. I'm not sure I thought Galactus needed to change. For the most part, I thought the card was mostly fine. Admittedly, it has seen a huge uptick in play rate around where I am on the ranked ladder recently, so I've been playing against it a lot more than before. But I'm a little surprised to see this change, and I mostly don't think this changes very much, so I'm looking forward to being wrong about this one. The most controversial of these changes, Leader. Leader has been adjusted, many people hoping this card's effect would be looked at with the next balance patch, as it causes a bit of a polarizing play experience, shall we say. Unfortunately, Leader has also had a similar change in that its power has been adjusted down to 3, and that is the only change the card has so far. However, there is more context to this decision, and I think it's important to explain that context when players are obviously not very happy about this adjustment. Many players are picky about Leader's effectiveness, and the ability to stop the game and make it difficult to play other 6-cost cards has often been a mixed bag. I'm going to lower the power a bit and see if further modifications are needed later. Were the original development notes translated over on this card? If this was everything, I would be a bit upset, I think. For the most part, Leader's effect is the most problematic part, and definitely, if not too good for the game, the thing that creates a negative play experience that people do not enjoy. And I'm not sure decreasing the point of power is going to change that very much. That said, there are definitely game states where Leader only having 3 power instead of 4 will mean that it is no longer going to win the game by itself for you, as the body it has is often very relevant in giving you extra stats to swing a location alongside what the opponent has played. However, the response to this was not good after these patch notes leaked, so Ben Brode has tweeted some further clarification on this Leader nerf on Twitter, saying that there is some discussion about a card nerf leak where Leader gets a 1 power reduction. There might be some context missing that he wanted to clear up, and here's the note that's intended to accompany that change. Leader's effect is proving to be very frustrating for a number of players and polarizing in its ability to lock down games and discourage playing any other 6-cost cards. We're taking a bit of power away from him for now and exploring further changes to the card in the future. That last sentence is not intended to mean we may or may not change him again. It is intended to mean we are determining exactly what change we have to make. And this gives me a little bit more hope, I suppose. They know the effect is very polarizing and arguably problematic for a lot of folks, and at the very least, not very enjoyable. And it wouldn't surprise me if there was some legal jargon they had to go through to make sure if you rework a card entirely that the IP is happy with it, or whether they just don't know how to fix this card. And they obviously want to keep Leader in the spirit of being Leader, have a similar style of effect, and maybe they just aren't sure how to balance it yet, don't have enough games in with adjusted versions to see how it plays. But I think this clarification goes a long way. It's, in my opinion, kind of going to suck to still be playing against Leader on the regular. It's still going to be the best 6-cost card in the game, I think, not particularly close. And I think it will be interesting to see how this gets addressed going forward. But to know that the plan is to adjust it again once more testing has been done and a better solution has been found does help alleviate some of my concerns a little bit. Moving on down to Nova. Nova, the last card that has been nerfed, I guess, this time around. It's also lost a point of power. It's a very common change for people to be seeing at this point in time on balance patches. Development notes on this one really simple. Nova's effect is much stronger than other 1-cost cards, so we didn't think it was appropriate for Nova to have the average stats of a 1-cost card. Sure. I don't think Nova's power mattered for much anyway. Occasionally it won you a game by being a body that was left over when nothing died, but for the most part, the effect is the reason you were playing it. I think the criticism is very valid. It's going to invalidate playing other 1-drops sometimes if Nova can ever potentially be good for you, because it just has the correct size body of an average 1-cost card, which... yeah, sure, I understand that concern from a future design perspective. Knock it down to 1 power. I don't think it's going to change very much in the immediate future. Moving on to these buffs, we'll look at Drax and Groot alongside each other. These are less buffs, I think, and more side grades, if you like. So we've gone from having Drax and Groot be 4/4s or 3/3s that have on reveals that when your opponent plays a card to this zone will give you +4 or +3 respectively. Instead, what has happened is they've been given an extra point of power as a base, so they always have 5 or 4 respectively, and if the opponent has played a card to the location you play it on, the buff is now 1 less in comparison. So while you might think the Guardians effects create quite a lot of fun, it can also feel like an all or nothing kind of game when you're playing with them. We hope to increase Drax and Groot's base stats to lower the risk of playing cards and increase their attractiveness in those cost slots. And you know what? I like these changes quite a lot. I think Drax is realistically going to shine moving forward, more than he has at least, thanks to a card like the most recent Season Pass. Why have I suddenly forgotten the name? Zabu, there we go. It's early in the morning, I'm very sorry. So I can see him seeing significantly more play, and making the card more appealing and less high risk seems like a good way to go. And Groot here, Groot being a 3/4 base means its stat line is significantly more reasonable in comparison to other 3-cost cards that do see play, and it still has a little bit of upside to make it one of the largest statted 3-cost cards out there if you don't have access to Maximus or things like this in your Silver Surfer decks, which should make it a bit more appealing in that regard. So these aren't massive changes, they aren't going to be super impactful I think, but for the most part they decrease variance, and that should be pretty good I think. Hazmat is a card that we weren't expected to see a buff, but here it is, gaining the extra point of power as well. We know there are some powerful looking Hazmat combo decks, but Hazmat's overall performance has been not good. So in this update we want to raise it slightly. I'm curious about this one. I think maybe I'm underestimating how much an extra point of power can do for a card, because to me it feels like Hazmat is all about that on reveal ability, and that's where the card belongs in these combo Wong, Luke Cage style decks. And I'm surprised that a point of power is raising that slightly in those exact words. So I think I'm probably missing something on this one. This change feels mostly unimpactful. I'm not entirely sure if there's a synergy I'm missing. Maybe 2 power changes something significantly. But in a game where you're using an effect to shrink your opponent's stats, I suppose your cards having more stats is always just going to make the card better, so welcome change I suppose, not worried about this suddenly destroying the metagame, and hopefully Hazmat's play rate can increase slightly and we can see more of that cool Luke Cage synergy going forward. We've got Black Cat up next, another one that has received just a point of power as a buff. Black Cat just rarely used. They want to increase its attractiveness by increasing its power. 3-7 is definitely a relevant stat line. We've seen this with Maximus, of course, over the course of a game. That's a big body. Getting this thing into play is not the easiest, though. It is definitely kind of hard to maneuver sometimes. I do think this body could potentially be worthwhile if you were looking to play some kind of like Ghost Rider Silver Surfer deck. I'm not entirely sure how those two things smash together, but giving you a synergy piece with a huge body that is affected by both of those cards seems kind of reasonable, you know? Ghost Rider on curve, pulling back a 7 power card without any extra help. Definitely kind of interesting. And then you can obviously still just Lady Sif and Infinite or something stupid like that if you really want to. Yeah, I think this is, again, a fine change. I like the fact we're adjusting cards that don't see very much play, keeping their spirits, you know, the way they were with the effects that they have always had, and trying to make them more attractive to play in the future. So, not so sure this one has a massive impact, but I think 7 is a very relevant number on a 3-cost card, and hopefully this encourages people to try out more Black Cat lists in the future. Fingers crossed. Last but not least, we've got Nakia. Nakia receiving a buff, one of the cards that's arguably been changed the most in Marvel Snap at this point in time. They like the effect, it's a very interesting mechanic, but it currently has a very low success rate, and they want to buff it up a bit to make it a more attractive option, again offering that extra point of power this time around to do so. Similar comments on this one as to Hazmat. I think the extra point of power makes this less punishing to play when you're trying to play it on curve with Mr. Negative, but I do think Nakia's effect being nerfed in the past has made it kind of harder to get the ability to land on the cards you care about it landing. In a world where Silver Surfer exists and, you know, all your 3-cost cards can just be buffed on the final turn of the game and you're getting them all, always, you kind of want to use Nakia to land buffs strategically on cards like Iron Man and stuff like this. But even at that point, Bast is doing a better job at landing that buff on those cards without them having to be at a very specific spot in your hand. I'm curious about this one. I think Nakia was a fan favourite. A lot of people really enjoyed playing with the card, but arguably was too good in the past when it buffed the entire hand. So I'm glad they're taking a look at it. They do want people to be able to play with that effect. They find it very interesting, and hopefully this is a move in the right direction to making that card more playable. There are many other changes in this balance patch. A few things about new audio, some new support for Russians, you know, an artifact for Arrow. Arrow will have an animated effect, which should be pretty cool. But if you want more details about all this kind of stuff, the non-card balance changes, go check out the article I've linked in the description box below. It's going to be the easiest way for you to break that down comprehensively. It also goes through a chunk of bug fixes and things that have been improved with this patch as well. If you're worried about a certain bug that you've been experiencing still being in the game or no longer being in the game. With all that said and done, do let me know what you think. Comment section down below, or come and join us in the community Discord server and let us know what you think about these upcoming buffs and nerfs. But until next time, I have been Howling Minds. Thank you for subscribing. You've been amazing, and hopefully I'll see you again sometime soon for more things Marvel Snap. Take care.